Hey guys, Mac here again. I said I'd have an update on that 2019 MacBook Pro, and that's exactly what I have for you. Now, it's quite a long video, but that's because I got asked a ton of questions about it. So I've tried to test quite a few different scenarios. So perhaps if you're only interested in little bits, you might want to skip through what is quite a long video. So what kind of things do I test in here? Well, I've got some direct kind of Handbrake conversion tests, along with some Final Cut Pro exports. I've also done some virtualization testing with Parallels Desktop 14 and VMware Fusion 11. Go and have a look at them, let me know what you think, and if you've got any direct questions, just drop me a comment in the section down below and I'll see if I can answer them for you. In general, I found the experience to be quite a good positive one with this unit, certainly over my 2018 experience anyway. And I kind of get the impression that this machine is what the 2018 unit should have been. Is it a worthwhile upgrade? Well, it really comes down to what you're upgrading from. If you're upgrading from the 2018 i9, probably not. But anything earlier, I think it's quite a big step up. It is quite a powerful machine. Have a look at the review, let me know what you think, and I'll catch you next time. Here we are again then. Let's have a more in-depth look at this machine. So firstly, let's just reaffirm which machine we're talking about. This is a 2019 15-inch MacBook Pro with the 2.3 GHz i9 with 8 cores, and it's got 16 GB of RAM allocated to it. Now, what we'll see is this machine's the base one from a graphics point of view. It has the Radeon Pro 560 in there. There are some Vega options as well. This machine doesn't have that. So a couple of quick points. Now, I did mention in my first intro video that this machine isn't mine. I'm actually setting it up for somebody. Now, I've been using it in anger and I actually quite like it, to the point that this has happened. I've actually gone off and bought myself one. Now this is one of it's a higher spec than this one, the one that I've got coming. It's got 32 GB of RAM and also one of the Pro Vega graphics chips and also a bigger SSD. So if you're interested in the step up performance on the Vega, check back in a couple of weeks once it turns up and I'll do a quick summary on that as well. I was also asked around running some of the benchmarks from the release 20 of Cinebench, so we can have a look at those. Here we go. So this is running in Mac OS, and this is release 20, as you can see. So the CPU is coming in at around 3009. That's relatively consistent. I ran that repeatedly, and the numbers are all pretty much around that point. What's interesting, by the way, is if we have a look at the performance in Windows, which is this one, you can see it's quite a bit lower. Now, again, I did run these repeatedly, and I got similar results. I think this is one of the mid-range ones. I think the highest I saw was about 2700. Now, there may be reasons for that, and I'm doing some tests around Handbrake, which will come later, and you'll see some of the effects that I'm seeing in Windows in Bootcamp. You might be interested in that. But to start off with, let's have a look at some of the Parallels Desktop 14 performance. As I'm sure most of you are aware, Parallels Desktop is essentially a desktop virtualization package. I use it to run lots of different versions of Windows because I'm on various different client sites and most of them tend to be Windows based. I also do a ton of server virtualization, but I tend to use VMware Fusion for my server stuff. But in the first instance, let's just have a look at our performance of Parallels. Now, I have a single machine configured. Let's have a quick look at the specification. I've got 8 processor cores allocated and 8 GB of RAM. If we have a look, you'll actually see you'll be able to select up to 16 cores. Now, of course, there aren't 16 cores in this machine. What you're seeing is 8 cores with hyper-threading, so you can actually allocate more to that machine if you want. So let's get this machine fired up and I'll show you some of the general performance. Now that didn't take long at all, so let's get logged into the machine. And there's our desktop. Now what I'm going to do, just to make this easier to view, is I'm just going to change it to a full screen desktop. So it's just going to look like a Windows machine. So if I pull up the task manager, you'll be able to see what's allocated. Under the performance, you'll see that we've got our 8 virtual processors allocated. We've got our 8 GB of RAM, and we've got a couple of hard disks allocated to this because this is a live machine and I use it for things already. So let's fire up some Office apps and we can have a look at some of the performance. So there's Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Visio, and Project. Pop into Task Manager, you can see, the memory usage has gone up, the processor's not particularly busy. This obviously works really, really well. I mean, I use this constantly in my day job and it's really, really efficient and it's a great way to work. Does it feel faster than the i9? No, it absolutely doesn't. But the one thing I will say is that the fans are running a lot lower. Now that's a little bit difficult for me to show, and I certainly, it's difficult for me to record the sound. But if you look at the fans in the top right there, you'll see that they are not running on maximum. Now on my i9, this would be flat out shortly after I've booted Windows. Now it does calm down once Windows has calmed down, but like I say, it does go very noisy when I fire up Windows. It's also interesting looking at the temperature here. It is running lower than my i9. My i9 hits 90 degrees plus as soon as I try and do anything in virtualization. Now, popping back to our Windows 10 machine, I'm just going to close down those apps. Now, there is a temptation in Parallels, by the way, to allocate too many cores and, too many resources. And to be honest, it's really not necessary. So for my normal office machine, I only typically have 2 or 4 cores allocated, and it works very, very well. It doesn't feel any slower by having 8 or more cores allocated. Now, of course, some of the benefits of running in virtualization are the fact that you can use snapshots. So let's have a look at the performance of snapshots on this machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a snapshot. So I'm going to Actions, take a snapshot. And that's pretty much done. Now it's worth just double checking on the taskbar, because sometimes it will show that it's finished the snapshot, but in fact it hasn't. But that's ready to go. So it's really, really quick, and it makes this really usable. Now what's particularly interesting though is not how long it takes to actually take that snapshot, it's how long it takes to actually roll back. So I'm going to make some changes to this machine. What I'm going to do is perhaps just remove Office from it, and then we'll come back and we will restore that snapshot and we can have a look at the performance of it. Now I'm not going to make you sit through this because it's not particularly interesting, so let's come back once Office is uninstalled. There we go, that didn't take very long at all. Now let's say for example you've made a mistake, you've removed some applications or something like that from your virtual machine. Well, it's very simple to switch back the snapshots. We can just roll back to that last snapshot that we took. So what we'll do is we'll pop into the snapshots and we'll revert back to that snapshot that we took earlier. So that's the one, and I'm going to go to that snapshot. And we're all done. Now it's that restoring the snapshots that tends to take the time rather than the taking them, but it's an incredibly useful piece of functionality from the virtualization platform. There are other things you can do as well, like for example I'm running in a full desktop at the moment, but you do have something called coherence. Now I don't really tend to use coherence because I find it kind of stresses the machine, and I will say coherence seems to work a lot better on this machine than it does on my i9, and let me show you what I mean. So I'm just going to exit the full screen there, and I'm going to pop into coherence. Now in this mode what actually happens is each of the applications appears on your Mac desktop, so you can run Mac applications right next to your Windows one. Now I think that's quite cool. Now the one thing I will say is this does work a lot better on this machine than it does on my 2018. My 2018 i9 is quite laggy trying to use this mode, so perhaps I'll give this another go because I do like this way of actually working. Whereas, like I say, it's not really that usable on my i9. Perhaps there's something wrong with the configuration on my i9. Anyway, let's get Parallels closed down. You can have a look at the shutdown times on this machine as well. So I'm just going to drop it out of coherence and we'll shut down this machine. Now the thing that's interesting is while the 5,000 RPM on my i9 they would be maxed out when I'm doing this sort of stuff, and like I say, it seems to be running cooler and it certainly seems to be running quieter. What about the general operation of the machine in macOS? Well, it's quite hard to demonstrate really, but what I can do, for example, is we've got Office running here, so let's get that fired up. There's Word. I will say Office has never been the fastest app on macOS, certainly to launch. But yeah, it feels much the same as my i9 to be honest, and I don't think you'll notice a lot of difference with that. I suspect what you might notice is that this will scale a bit more, or do more things at once rather than individual things faster, and I suspect it will just run cooler. So if we have a look here, you'll see the temperatures there, and you can see the fans are still at around 4,500 RPM. There's a cool little app, by the way, I got asked about the other day from one of my videos. So I've just opened multiple windows of Word, and you see there how I can hover over the dock and I can choose between any of them. Now the app to do that is something called HyperDock. It's a great little app. It enables some of the Windows snapping, much like they do in Microsoft Windows, but it also enables that hover over an icon so you can choose all your windows as well. It's quite a useful little app, that. So let's move on. We'll have a look at the performance in Final Cut Pro and also some Handbrake Conversions. If you're interested in VMware Fusion, check out towards the end of the video because I do the same sort of test with Fusion as well. What we are looking at here is the export of my original brief review from Final Cut Pro out to a 4K video for onward upload to YouTube. Now, what's quite interesting is if we look at the power gadget and just look at the way the resources are being used on the machine. So let's start with the 2018 i9 MacBook Pro. Firstly, have a look at the operating temperature. You'll see it's around 93, 94 degrees. The utilization's a bit higher, about 69, 70%. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Now, the other thing that's quite interesting is check out the base frequency. It's currently operating at around 2.4 to 2.5 gigahertz, sometimes drops a little bit lower than that. So I don't think this is massively utilized when it's exporting the video. Now let's drop back and we'll have a look at the 2019 MacBook Pro. Now, what you'll see here, firstly from the utilization, you'll see that it's a bit lower. It's operating at around 55-ish, but also check out the temperature. It's far better. It's around 78, 79 degrees. Now the other thing I've noticed is that the fans are not as ramped up on the 2019 unit as they are on the 2018. Fortunately, I can't show you because it's in the toolbar, but they are operating audibly lower on the 2019 machine than they are on the 2018. So what about export times? Well, this is a bit surprising. In the 3 or 4 times that I've run this test, the 2018 i9 MacBook Pro has come out on top. So in this particular one that I'm showing, for example, you'll see that the 2019 unit finished in 9 minutes and 4 seconds and the 2018 unit finished in 8 minutes and 6 seconds. Now, I've run this repeatedly, and while it's not always down to the second, obviously, it's broadly the same in every single instance that I've tried it. The 2018 unit is coming out on top, and I have to say that surprised me quite a bit. Now, there are still some things going for the 2019 unit in this. It's running far cooler, and the impact on the battery of running this is also far better on the 2019 unit. One thing I do notice on my 2018 is when the machine's been highly utilized, even when the unit is plugged in, sometimes the battery will drop down a few percent. And I've always found that quite unusual. I haven't observed that on the 2019 at all. What we're looking at here is a conversion of one of my travel videos. Now, I've set the video settings quite high just so we can try and get a better view of the timing. So again, on the right, we've got the 2018 i9 and on the left, the 2019 unit. Let's start with the 2018 unit. And in no surprise to anybody, having a look at the temperature, you'll see it's at 96, 97 degrees, so it is running quite hot. Utilization is quite high as well, but the thing that's most surprising for me and a little bit irritating is look at the frequency. You'll see that the clock speed is below the base stated level of this machine, which is 2.9 gigahertz. Also, the fans are ramped up quite high. They're running on maximum at the moment, which according to my sound meter is about 48 decibels, measured from the middle of the screen on the base of the unit, which seems to be about the loudest point. Now looking at the 2019 unit, the most obvious thing that sticks out to me is look at the temperature. It seems to be far more manageable than on the 2018 unit. Also, looking at the frequency, you'll see that it's averaging around 2.6, 2.7 gigahertz, and now that's on a machine with a base clock speed of 2.3 gigahertz, so it's not dropping below base, unlike the 2018 unit that I've also got. Now, the fans are not quite on maximum here. They're running a little bit lower according to the fan control program. It's also a little bit quieter. It's averaging around 45, 46 decibels. Not an awful lot of difference, but it's kind of noticeable, I think, but it's not one of those things that bothers me very much. It's very hard to have an objective opinion about it. So let's look at the total conversion time. So the 2019 unit managed to complete this video conversion in 58 minutes and 44 seconds, whereas the 2018 unit took 1 hour and 12 minutes and 40 seconds. Now I have run this 3 times. What I will say is the 2019 unit seems very consistent. It's basically done it between about 58 minutes and 30 seconds and 59 minutes. The 2018 has been less consistent. I think this is the best time I've seen, which is 1 hour and 12 minutes and 40 seconds. The other two range between about 1 hour and 14 minutes, and the worst one I saw was about 1 hour 16 minutes. So there does seem to be some more variance in the 2018, but the 2019 is certainly the winner in this test. This is the same Handbrake conversion, but running in Windows 10 under Bootcamp. Now, the thing that stands out for me is if you look at the temperatures, you'll see that it's bouncing between 100 degrees and mid-80s. It's done that throughout the whole of the conversion. And also, if you look at the frequency map, it's more like the pre-patched i9 from last year, where it just seems to throttle back constantly. The package frequency as well doesn't seem to get much above base, and for most of the time it seems to be a bit below that base clock speed, which makes me wonder what's actually happening in Windows that's different to running under Mac OS. Now, that firmware update that they're supposed to apply, is it a firmware update if it's operating system dependent? I've always thought, firmware is to do with the base of the machine rather than actually the operating system that sits on top of it. The machine itself also seems to run a lot hotter, so just measuring it with my heat gun, for example, it's running at about 46-47 degrees across the top of the case, so it certainly seems to run hotter when you are doing intensive tasks in Windows. Now, bear in mind this is using the discrete graphics card as well. There's no support for the integrated graphics chip on Bootcamp from what I can tell, but yeah, it certainly seems to run hotter in Windows. In terms of total conversion time, in Windows it took 1 hour, 4 minutes and 33 seconds. I have run it a couple of times and it seems to come out about the same point for the 3 runs that I've given it. Now, that compares to running in Mac OS, where it completes it in around 59 minutes, and the 2018 unit completes it in around 1 hour 14 minutes. So it is faster than the 2018 unit, but a little bit slower than running it in Mac OS. But the point I would take away from this is it does run significantly hotter under Windows. And also bear in mind you can't use the integrated graphics card, so the battery life is going to be fairly significantly worse under Windows. I will see if I can do some battery tests for this. I'm not sure I'll get time to do that. If I don't, I will tag them on to the comments later on. If you're interested in VMware Fusion, then stick around, that's the next bit. Now, I will say I don't find the performance of VMware as good as Parallels Desktop, certainly not on Mac OS, but we'll go and have a look at that anyway. I tend to use Fusion for my server-based virtualization because it's a lot easier for me to get those server images onto the server version of the product, so ESX and all that good stuff. But I do have a Windows 10 machine here, so we can have a look at the relative performance. I'll be honest, I think VMware is losing the desktop virtualization battle to Parallels, and there's a few reasons for it. You'll see it in a few minutes around the performance. So let's have a look at this. We're running the VMware Fusion Professional version 11.1, which is the latest version. Now, this machine, if we look at the specification, I've got the same allocation that we had on Parallels earlier, which is 8 processor cores, 8 gig of RAM, and the hard drive type in this version is a SCSI hard drive type. You can also select NVMe, and I've got another video which shows you how to convert a Fusion machine to an NVMe hard drive if you're interested. But let's have a look at the general performance of this virtual machine. Now, the thing that's interesting, by the way, if you look up at the menu bar here, you'll see that it's showing 1 hour and 28 minutes to fully charge, and you'll see the fans are running at about 2100 RPM at the moment. Fusion seems to really impact on the fan speed. It seems to ramp up quite quickly. It seems slower than Parallels, and also notice what happens to the battery charging while it's running. Now, it doesn't happen every time, but sometimes when I fire the machine up, it comes up and says not charging while it's running. So I think it might draw a little bit too much power. So let's have a look at the performance of this anyway. There you go. You can see in the taskbar there, the battery's changed to not charging, which I find quite interesting. That doesn't tend to happen under Parallels from what I've seen. Fans are still pretty stable, 2200 RPM, 23, 24, so they are slowly going up. Utilization is still relatively low at 42%, but the temperature is quite high, 94. Still not throttling, we're still well above base clock. There we are, and there's our desktop. Now, as you can see, like I say, the performance is far slower than under Parallels, but let's get logged in anyway, because I think once the machine's actually up and running, it is it feels pretty much the same as Parallels once it's operational. You'll see the fans are pretty high now, they're 4400. So let's have a look at the performance. I'll fire up some Office apps, you can see what that's like. First, let's have a quick look at Task Manager. You'll see our memory there, you'll see our CPU, we've got our 8 virtual processors allocated. Still pretty busy. So let's fire up some Office apps and you can see the comparative performance. There's Word, there's Excel, and there's PowerPoint. So it does work pretty well. I mean, like I say, once the machine's actually fired up, the performance is perfectly acceptable. I think one of the bigger performance gaps as well starts to show itself is when you actually look at things like the snapshotting. Now I'm going to show you it, but I'm going to speed it up because it does take a little while to run. Notice the fans are also running pretty high now, the 5800. I don't see that under Parallels, certainly not once the machine's settled down and operational. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a snapshot of this machine. So virtual machine, snapshots, take a snapshot. So have a look at the taskbar, you'll see that it's still taking that snapshot there. We'll let that finish. So that's done, and as you can see it takes quite a while compared to Parallels, and we'll also look at restoring that snapshot as well. This Fusion also has a similar view to coherence in Parallels, something called Unity, I think. So that looks very similar, where we can have apps running side by side with their Apple counterparts. So let's have a look at that. So we've got Excel running, we've got PowerPoint running. So what I'm going to do is quickly change the view to Unity. There you go. Now as you can see, it just now looks very similar to coherence in Parallels. The one thing I will say is this experience, I'm sure you can see there that it's a little bit laggy. That's more what I'm used to with the performance in both Parallels and VMware Fusion, although I will say it is a lot better in Parallels on this machine. But let's have a look at restoring snapshots as well. We can have a look and see what that performance is like. So what I'm going to do is just quickly remove Office from this machine, and I won't make you sit through that, and then we'll have a look at the time to actually restore that snapshot. So Office is uninstalled. What I'm going to do now is we can have a look at the time it takes to actually restore that snapshot, the same as I did in Parallel. So I'll pop in a virtual machine, snapshots, restore snapshot. We'll click don't save because we're just going to restore straight back. So let's have a look and see how long that takes. Right, and that's done. And as you can see, restoring is actually pretty quick. It is not as quick as Parallels, either in taking snapshots or restoring them. And also the impact on the machine in terms of operations, the fans are higher. It just seems a heavier load than Parallels. But I said I'd show you it, so there it is. So let's get this machine shut down. And it's done. Now I don't want to get into the Parallels versus VMware Fusion argument. I don't think Fusion or VMware is keeping up in terms of desktop virtualization compared to Parallels, certainly in the Mac world, and I tend to use Parallels now for all my desktop based stuff and VMware Fusion for all my server. Anyway, I did say I'd test it for you, and there it is.